This week on the WriterCon podcast,
Lots of books, good ones and bad ones. If you read a book and it excites you, it scares you, it thrills you, it arouses you, go back and look and see how they did it. How did they use words and pacing and plotting to evoke that emotional reaction? If you read a book and it sucks, if it loses you, if you don't believe the characters, if the dialogue is flat, go back and analyze why. What mistakes did they make? One of the great things about writing is all of the greatest writers ever have shared their secrets with you.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Lara Bernhardt, award-winning author of the Wonderland Files series.
Hey there, writers. I'm joined today, as usual, by our sound engineer, Jesse Ulrich, and Lara Bernhardt, the award-winning novelist and one of my co-conspirators on WriterCon, which is, as we record this, exactly 1 week in the rearview mirror. Lara, you were there all 4 days. Did you have any favorite moments from WriterCon this year?
Ooh, favorite moments. Of course, I had lots, but let me pare them down. I had set up ahead of time to do a meetup with some of our first timers. And that was a wonderful experience. I had so much enthusiasm in the hotel lobby when we joined together, and I took them around and made sure that they were comfortable, and they were delightful people. I also really love when we hand out the awards at the end, the looks on people's
Contest
faces.
winners, yeah.
Yes, the contest winners, people who were there. There was such a good energy there this year that it really was a delightful weekend. But I think getting to meet all the new people and then getting to see people light up when they won the contest are probably some of my favorite moments.
Well, that meeting is important, and I got to admit, I don't really even understand it, but I can see in the email that I get that people are going to to a writers conference for the first time, and they're very nervous about it. I mean, to me, it should show up, have fun, learn stuff, but I know that's out there, so you were there to calm nerves and whatnot.
Yes,
which I think is
I've been
wonderful.
to some conferences before where I didn't feel like people who'd been there really reached out, and it gets to be what I was trying to avoid was that people who'd been there before were kind of in a group, and the new people were kind of left feeling like outsiders. I wanted everyone to know they were very welcomed with very open arms, and I thought if we did that the night before, we'll get it out of the way, and everybody can start first minute, day one, and hopefully have a great experience. So that's what I was wanting. I've been to some places where I just didn't feel like anyone cared if I was there or wasn't, and we do. So I wanted to make that
We
very.
absolutely do. Well, that was terrific. Jesse, how about you? You were all over the place since you had about 6 different jobs. Do you have any favorite moments from WriterCon?
I mean, I loved how there was a group of younger than me people there, which was nice as not being like the youngest person at
Like
WriterCon.
Scarlett, the 13-year-old author?
Well, I was gonna say, talking to Scarlett and her mom, I think was the highlight of my time. It was just Scarlett's amazing, and her like incredibly supportive mom who also loves reading. Like they were just great, and it was just such a well put together 13-year-old. Like she could have an adult conversation with me about adult things, and I can ask her like fun things about her illustrator and her pets. We were comparing cat photos at one point. It was just great to have such a weird, fascinating mix of different kinds of authors there this year.
Some of those younger attendees dubbed me conference mom, which I also dearly love.
Yes, and they were all dressing up throughout the weekend, which was just it sort of mixed my two loves, which is like Comic-Con and cosplay and reading. So it was great.
That's fantastic.
So fun.
Well, our interview today is with Lee Goldberg, who is one of the few people I know who's been successful with both novels and screenplays. He's a #1 New York Times bestselling author, over 40 books. He's had enormous success with his Eve Ronin series. He created the Hallmark movie series, Mystery 101, and now he's gotten what was originally going to be a standalone thriller called Malibu Burning, I mean, it's still coming out. It's just the first book in a series now. I don't want to confuse anybody, but Malibu Burning has just been released. It involves a master thief with a conscience and the dogged investigators trying to stop him from pulling off the ultimate heist amidst a raging wildfire. And boy, can he talk about fire. We will talk to Lee after the news segment. Jesse, take us away. This first story caught my eye, not because I read it and thought, well, that'll help people learn how to write, because it probably won't, but it does for me reinforce why we do it. The importance of art, and particularly I think writing, and that's derived from a New York Times article about people using writing programs as therapy and performance art in jail. And it does a wonderful profile with someone they call Mr. Johnson, who brings to the jails in the Minneapolis area sometimes as much as 40 times a month. He visits them and tries to tap this incarcerated pool of literary talent, brimming with insights about, of course, the criminal justice system, but other things as well. He gives them writing prompts, they respond, they generate some really first-rate material, according to these sources. Johnson founded a nonprofit organization called Free Writers. He trained his instructors, and now they're branching out to many other companies. And people are saying that this is a wonderful addition, that these writing programs have generated critically acclaimed work and provided intimate glimpses into life behind bars in the United States, which, as you probably know, has the largest incarcerated population of any country in the world. Lara, I know you've taught writing in many different venues. Are you seeing how this could be beneficial to the prison population?
Absolutely. I've actually seen I've seen a group who takes rescue animals into prisons, and the people there incarcerated are taught a skill of basically working like a vet tech, and they're taught how to care for these animals, and it gives them something beneficial that they're doing that gives back. I think this is a likewise incredibly helpful outlet for people so that they can work through things. And it's not something we're proud of that we have more people jailed in the US, and I think we could learn from other countries, finding ways to help avoid incarceration, but people who are there, keeping them busy and active and allowing them to nurture, whether it's another like an animal or their own drive to write and share their experiences, I think can only be helpful.
Yeah, I think so too. Jesse, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, this reminds me, there's a nonprofit here in Oklahoma called Poetic Justice that teaches, mostly for women in prison, but teaches them poetry as a way of dealing with the trauma of their lives. And it's an incredibly moving experience when you read someone who never really thought about poetry, maybe didn't care that much in school, but like using the medium of writing to sort of deal with the situation that they find themselves in. And it's incredible. I mean, one, we are imprisoning a lot of people. We should find better ways of actually rehabilitating them instead of just putting them somewhere for a long period of time.
Agreed. And isn't it a nice change of pace to have a story that's not about a mystery writer murdering anyone or anything like that?
Yeah. And then writing a grief book with their children about said murder.
Yeah, instead somebody using writing, to do what it's supposed to do, to create good in the world. My second news story has to do with the FairyLoot phenomenon, and that's Loot, L-O-O-T, just in case you're looking for their website. I have to thank our daughter Katie for tipping me off to this story. During WriterCon, which I probably mentioned was just a week ago, we had a silent auction, and by far the item which eventually sold for the most amount of money was one of these beautiful FairyLoot editions of a recent fantasy novel. In case you're not aware, these are a lot like, if you're my age, the Folio Society from England or Easton Press books, people taking books and making very fancy editions, in this case with gorgeous covers and scalloped edges that have art, drawn across them. They're just beautiful, beautiful books. But Fairy Loot is not doing the classics. I mean, some of them might become classics, but they're doing new or contemporary books, usually books that have targeted young people. Most of them have been fantasy, but I noticed the most recent one comes from Jennifer Barnes, which some of you will remember was one of the first ever guests on this podcast, a tremendously successful young adult author. And these books are really, not only, of course, bringing people to reading, but bringing people to an appreciation of how beautiful books can be. Lara, I know you're all over this story. Why are these things so popular and expensive?
Well, I think the FairyLoot concept of that subscription box that shows up when you subscribe to it is a real winner. I think subscription boxes are very popular right now, but as far as the books themselves, you nailed it. They've got those beautiful sprayed edges that have the designs on the side. Some of them have gilt on the front.
Yes,
They're
beautiful.
gorgeous collectible books, and I think they're targeting the younger crowd because there's a real resurgence in print books among young people. We keep hearing that young people don't want to read, everything's going digital.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, we've got a big push for retro with the younger group. They're bringing back vinyl. They like things that are retro. And this will make you feel old, but they're starting to feel like print books give them that retro vibe. And when something this beautiful shows up that you can put on your shelf, it's collectible, it's elegant, it's something that I got to hold that book that we had up for auction, and I'll agree, it cast its spell on me. I could not get over the beautiful designs on the edges. I'm pretty smitten myself.
Yeah. At one point, my niece, Barbie Lorenz, pointed to it and said, "Do you know what that is?" Like she couldn't believe we had one,
Yes,
much less that we were giving away to somebody.
absolutely. And only because Katie was on top of things and snapped one up before the real fervor
Yeah,
began did we even have one. They're hard to get.
I was just on their website. You have to join a wait list for both the YA version and the adult version right now. So
Wow, that's popular. But I think you're totally right about this retro thing. And you remember on the cruise, the WriterCon cruise, Amy talking about how she talked to somebody who was all over retro and was like, "Look at this! I'm reading a book made of paper."
Of paper, yes, I know.
Well, I mean, we should point out, like, it wasn't authors or book readers that decided we had to have ugly-looking books. That was capitalism.
Yeah.
That was trying to make books
That's
as efficient as possible.
That's an
Books
excellent point.
Yeah, books used to be gorgeous all the time. All of them were. And then, I mean, like, I can't read like the commercial paperback type books because, like, one, the font's too small, and two, it doesn't feel comfortable to read something that compact. Like, books used to be big and beautiful and pretty, and I'm glad this is coming back. As listeners of this podcast know, I read on my Kindle, but I still buy nice copies of the books I love because I like to hold them and smell them.
Yeah.
Look at them.
But did you see anything that you'd buy? I mean, it looks to me like, maybe I'm wrong, but it looks to me like most of these books are targeting young female readers.
I mean,
Something I could give my sons
And
for Christmas.
a lot of fantasy books, yes.
A lot of fantasy books. Yeah, it was kind of hard. I was looking at some of the adult fantasy options, and they weren't necessarily books I was familiar with, but they didn't seem overly like, I guess the website's branding is more towards women than is men, but I don't think it's turning men away. And as far as technology goes, they have an unboxing video on their homepage, so it's very, very mixing of the two, the two aspects of this, the realness of it, but then also for a younger audience who likes to make videos of them opening packages, which is still an amazing thing that exists, that I'm like, I could have been doing this 15 years ago and didn't know it was a thing.
Yeah. All right, Jesse, cue up the music. Let's talk to Lee Goldberg. welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Glad you've dropped the restraining order.
It was a quid pro quo, so it's worth it. Okay, traditional first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
Read lots of books, good ones and bad ones. If you read a book and it excites you, it scares you, it thrills you, it arouses you, go back and look and see how they did it. How did they use words and pacing and plotting to evoke that emotional reaction? If you read a book and it sucks, if it loses you, if you don't believe the characters, if the dialogue is flat, go back and analyze why. What mistakes did they make? One of the great things about writing is all of the greatest writers ever have shared their secrets with you. They're right there in black and white on the page for you to look at. If there's a book that you just absolutely love, deconstruct it. Look, take every scene and put it up on the wall with index cards and try to understand how the plot worked and how it moved and how the key information was revealed and how the jokes were staged. You can learn so much from good books and bad books just by reading them.
That's really a terrific answer.
I love that.
That would be a great idea for a WriterCon session, to have somebody deconstruct Pride and Prejudice or whatever, something.
I did that.
Yeah.
I did that all the time. If I saw a TV show I liked or read a book that I liked, I would take it apart and try to understand how it worked. And even the bad ones, especially the bad ones. Why did they fail? What mistakes did that writer make? Why did they lose me? And I think it's important. And there are so few other industries or forms of art where you can do that, where you can do an autopsy on something and learn from it.
Let's talk about what you're publishing now, Malibu Burning. Now, you've been doing those Eve Ronan books, right, for a while, but this is a standalone thriller, right?
No, it's actually a series now. When I wrote it, it was a standalone thriller, but the pre-orders were so huge for the book that before it was even released, my publisher said, you've got to write a sequel, and it has to be ready for us to have for pre-sales when your book comes out. So the sequel, Ashes Never Lie, is already finished. It's coming out in a year from now. And that book has had so many pre-orders. I'm about to start on a third one. So it's been an interesting ride for me.
That's the first time I've heard that answer. That's terrific. So this book came out, like a week ago as we record this, and it's already a hit.
It's already a hit. I'm retiring. I'm going to move on to a yacht with my mistress and just sip pina coladas all day.
You're living the dream.
That really is kind of a best case scenario there. I was going to ask you, why did you move away from the Eve books?
Well, I haven't actually done that. I mean, the Malibu Burning is set in Los Angeles County with 2 arson investigators, and the fire in Malibu Burning is the same fire at the end of Lost Hills, the first Eve Ronan novel. So there, an oblique reference is made to Eve in the book, but the sequel coming up in September 2024, Ashes Never Lie, is a crossover with the Eve Ronan series. She's in it as well. So I haven't given up, and I have a book coming out in January, Dreamtown, which is the next Eve Ronan novel.
That's fantastic. So you didn't let it go. I was really curious why, and then you kind of answered my question that this was very successful, but no, you're going to keep going with both. I love that.
That's
Congratulations.
fantastic.
Well, thank you.
So tell us about Malibu Burning. What's it about? I mean,
Malibu Burning is both a big, over-the-top, action-packed heist con man novel, and it's a police procedural. I wanted to go back to doing those kind of big stage sort of picture, popcorn movie novels that I did with my Ian Ludlow series, and as I did with the books I did with Janet Ivanovich. But at the same time, I have this big new audience that expects police procedurals from me. So I decided to marry the two, a police procedural with a big heist, and to do a different kind of police procedural. As I mentioned earlier, these are not traditional homicide investigators. They're arson investigators, which we haven't seen much of, if at all, in crime fiction. So at the beginning of the book, there's a dual track. There's creating the heist, building the heist. You're with the bad guys as they do it. And then there's the other track of the arson investigators looking into the biggest wildfire in California history and realizing, wait a minute, there's more going on here than it appears. We think there's a heist. And then the two timelines collide into what I hope is a hybrid sort of crime novel thriller.
Sounds terrific.
It's exhausting. Don't write
but not
25-line
to
thrillers.
read, right? Maybe to write, not to read.
I had no gray hair before I wrote that book. I was also 15 years younger and did not have this chin.
Oh, that was a tough book, man.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of things few have accomplished, like being both a successful screenplay writer and book writer, and having your book turn into a huge series launching hit before it's even released, you've also, this is the one that really irritates me, Lee, you've also received 2 Edgar Awards. What does that feel like?
I'm going to ease your irritation. I have not received 2 Edgar Awards.
What?
I've been nominated, but denied
okay,
the
fine.
honor I deserve, the acclaim I deserve.
Okay, now I feel
This is
better.
why I'm a hard drinker. This is full of vodka. I'm going to take a swig now that you reminded me of my crushing failure to win a damn Edgar.
Sorry, nominated. I'll never live that down. But being nominated is still pretty good.
No, it's not.
And,
no, I have to win. I have to have that gold-plated statuette here on my desk to remind me that I'm not the fraud that I know I am.
Yeah. People always talk about your characters and how unique and okay, maybe not always, but frequently they talk about your characters, and you've got a unique one in this book. Do you have a process? How do you get inside the minds of the characters you create?
I always start with character. I have to be intrigued by them. I have to know what their conflicts are so I can bring out the drama and the humor. This book was a little bit different in it that I think I started with the plot and not character, but usually I start with characters and the plot comes from that. And then I have to spend months with these characters on the page in my head. I better enjoy spending time with them or my reader won't. So that's, these are just characters that have to interest me. And I assume if they do that, they'll interest you.
That's a good rule of thumb. So this time around, your protagonist is a thief, though granted he has a conscience, and a particularly adept move. I thought you've given him motivation for wanting to commit this crime that, has an emotional or a personal basis. Why'd you do that?
Because bad guys are the heroes of their own story. They don't think of themselves as bad guys. They think of themselves as really great guys who just may be doing something that's unconventional, or maybe a little bit against the law, or a little bit violent, whatever. Bad guys don't wake up every morning and go, I want to take over the world, rape women, and kill innocent babies. No, they have lives. They go to the bathroom. They have people they love. They have goals. They have dreams. They have disappointments. They have mothers and fathers and family. They're fully rounded people. So I always ask myself, who are they and why are they doing what they're doing, and what is their own self-image? It's not always just about money. That's part of it when you're a thief, but there are other things going on in your life that make you a thief, a background and pressures on you and expectations you've placed on yourself. So I always think about, what are they doing all the time? What are their goals? They aren't just sitting around waiting for the detective to show up. Their life isn't all about the detective solving the crime. When someone comes to interview them, they're in the middle of something else. They have plans for the day that didn't include this guy showing up at their house. So what's going on in their mind? Who are they? Even if the scene is from the point of view of my detective or my other protagonist, I keep the bad guy, I put that in quotation, what he's doing and what his day is about in my mind and what his point of view is, because that colors the dialogue and the interaction. I think it's a huge mistake when writers create one-dimensional characters who exist to serve a purpose rather than being characters with an emotional life of their own. That's also how I deal with violence. To me, characters are not just targets. I mean, these people have people who love them, people who depend on them, people they're responsible for. So these deaths have meaning and have repercussions. So that's how I approach characters. And the other key to my approach to characters is humor. I don't believe these unremittingly dark books that have no humor, because it's not real. I don't know about the two of you, but in my own life, in some of the saddest, most tragic moments, there's always been some kind of humor. And I'm not talking about stand-up comedy and making jokes, but the humor that arises from conflict, from putting different people together in unusual and unexpected situations. Humor arises. It's natural. It's unnatural not to have it. And I think having humor, especially with the quote-unquote bad guys, humanizes them and draws the reader in and allows them to invest emotionally in what I'm writing about.
I absolutely love that. I have given a talk a couple of times about character motivation, and I talk about that very thing, about really thinking about what drives that character and what's going on outside of that, and avoiding that one note mustache twirling evil bad guy. And you really expended on that nicely. I really appreciate that advice. You did a lot of research for this book.
I
Is that
did.
correct? And you were even interviewing some arson crews? How did
I
that?
interviewed a ton of arson investigators.
Yeah.
Is this a family audience, or am I allowed to use profanity here?
How bad is it? The
All right,
the only difference is whether I have to check the box that
I'll
says
tamp it
this
down.
podcast. Okay.
I interviewed a lot of arson investigators, and I came up with an approach that I don't want to share in this podcast to committing this arson. And I ran it past this one guy at the ATF, and he cursed me. I said, "Why are you cursing me?" He said, "Because that could actually work, and we wouldn't know it."
Oh.
Oh,
Oh.
you want me to change it in my book? He said, "No, damn you. Now I got to go do it." What do you mean go do it? I got to go set some fires using your approach and then analyze them forensically and otherwise to see if we could detect them. So he went out and did it. He went out and set
Wow.
fires using my method, not in the community, but in their testing area, their the parking lot of the ATF or whatever. He tested all these different variations on the way I committed arson, and my characters rather, and how it might be detected, what's left behind. And he sent me the videos, and he also told me about the test results. And he told me that's why he likes talking to creative people, authors and screenwriters, because they're bureaucrats. They don't have imaginations. Not bureaucrats, but they're scientists or investigators. And they by talking to writers, we give them ideas they wouldn't otherwise have, different ways of looking at a crime. So they welcome it when I call with my stupid questions.
Wow. That is fantastic. And I hear you learned something about convict fire crews in your
Yes.
research.
Well,
What is that?
there's actually now a TV series about it. I think it's called Fire Country or something on CBS.
Oh, okay.
But I wrote this book well over, I think, a year and a half, 2 years ago. But it hadn't been a TV series yet. But the state of California and a lot of other states uses convicts to fight fires, sort of like a modern variation of a chain gang. And in return for fighting fires, these convicts get to live out in the country in very low security camps, and they eat good food, and they're smelling mountain air, and they're risking their lives for nothing. They're also promised, when you get out, your years you spend as a convict firefighter will help you get a job as a real firefighter, which is a complete lie. It doesn't happen. But the state of California would have to spend $1 billion more a year on firefighting if they did not have these convict firefighters essentially working for free, doing everything a fireman does, only not getting paid for it or having a health plan or a pension or any of that. The only difference is they're wearing orange suits and the other firefighters are wearing yellow or something like that. But there have been efforts to end the convict firefighter program, but the state of California just can't afford it, especially now when we're dry as a bone here and just sneezing creates a wildfire.
Wow. Let's go back to that interesting tidbit that you were talking about. You came up with a whole new way of, I won't give anything away, but you mentioned it already. Setting a fire, and then you talked about how it sparked the investigators to actually go and do this. What did they send back to you? You mentioned that you got to see.
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail because it'll give away how my bad guy is setting these fires, but they showed the method, they showed that it worked, and they showed what it left behind. And in many cases, it left nothing behind. It only left something behind in certain situations, and even then, you have to know what to look for. So they sent me. They scraped the ashes on rocks and concrete and stuff and told me what the chemical test came back with. But that could take weeks. By the time you get that information, the fire is long since over. My book, they're trying to resolve this in the heat of the ongoing wildfire. They don't have time to wait for the lab results. They send stuff in, but instead they go with their gut. They say, we think this is what's happening. We can't prove it yet. And right now, the resources of the fire department and the LAPD are all marshaled against saving people's lives and saving structures and fighting this wildfire, not about hunting down the possible arson, especially when it doesn't look like an arson was involved. it looks like a wind-driven wildfire created by fallen power lines. So my two guys are basically looking into this without any of the resources they need, putting their lives on the line. That's how my dad used to talk. My dad was a television anchor man. Pass the salt, Lee.
Oh, that's fantastic.
How was school today? All the time he talked like this, even in
That's
casual
fabulous.
conversation, which is funny for about 30 seconds. But when it's your entire freaking life, it
Every
gets a little
day.
irritating.
Yes. Well, I'm
we-
glad you amused us for a minute there.
Yeah, just a minute. Stop
Just
now,
for a
Lee.
second. So, no, that's very intriguing. Thank you for sharing that about your book. What does your typical writing day look like? We get asked that a lot, so now I'm going to ask you.
Well, I start by lighting up the crack pipe. I'm watching some porn.
And that
No,
helps?
what-
Oh, okay.
a typical day for me.
A typical.
A typical day. I do my best writing between 8 p.m. and 2 in the morning.
Really? Wow.
So, I go to bed at like 2 in the
Yes,
morning.
Team Lara.
We wake up on a normal day about 10, have breakfast, answer emails, and basically spend the day doing the business of writing while rewriting the crap I wrote the night before. Then I have dinner and I start writing fresh again. And I do that until the book is done. But, I have so many other things going on in my life. I'm not just writing books. I also have
Yes.
a small publishing company. I also, when there isn't a writer's strike, I'm usually writing a script or two on contract each year. And I also have to do things like this, where I do interviews and I do book signings and speaking engagements. So the day gets full of distractions, which means it's easier for me to rewrite during the day than to write from scratch, so to speak.
Well, you've got a series now at Hallmark, right? The Mystery
It was
101.
just canceled.
Oh,
Oh,
God. Okay, Laura, you just take it from here, okay?
he's
I
I'm
got
gonna
going to be a
nothing.
male escort.
He's gonna reach for his drink again. Oh no.
How many movies did you get out of that?
7.
Oh, well, okay. I'm feeling less sorry now. But
Well,
tell us about that experience. What's it like working for Hallmark?
What's it like working for Hallmark? Well, it exists in a world where there's very few minorities, no profanity, no adultery, no alcohol, no sex. It's hard to create conflict in a world like that. It's very wholesome. It's the Hallmark world. It's a whole different planet. I've done a number of Hallmark movies, a couple of which, because of the pandemic, weren't shot. I wrote a couple, Darrow and Darrows, with my good friend Phoebe Sutton, who created that show. It's wholesome entertainment, and that's fine. But it's a difficult to write a crime drama without the sort of vices that create murder and the sorts of things that motivate crimes. And it's changed a bit, but it's too much of a lily white, conflictless world. It's almost like Mayberry, RFD. It's.
Is it hard to construct a mystery when there can't be any conflict?
Yes. Yes. When you have romance where even a kiss is considered pornographic, but
Oops, it's a corpse. Someone should do something about that.
I remember I once was talking to a Hallmark executive about future movies in the series, and I pitched an idea, and she looked at me. She says, "Are you out of your mind? Do you think this is Showtime? We can't do that story on Hallmark." I said, "It's funny you did it today at noon." We went, "What?" "I just pitched you a 1957 episode of Perry Mason." So why is it okay at noon on Hallmark, but not okay in Hallmark mysteries and movies? And that did not endear me to my friends at Hallmark.
Oh, I bet not. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, it is clear that you have had some varied and exciting experiences on your writer's journey. Are there any survival tips you've picked up along the way, or anything you can offer our listeners?
Have a sense of humor. Stay grounded in reality, because television is not reality on screen or behind it. You have to keep your wits about you. My greatest achievement as a television writer producer is that I've been married 35 years, and I have no adultery or anything. And I'm not addicted to anything. I'm not. Well, that's not true. I drink a lot of Diet Coke. You put a box of Oreos in front of me, it'll last about 10 seconds. But otherwise, and I've seen in my Hollywood career way too many marriages fall apart. see way too many writers who have alcohol and drug and other addiction problems. There's so much pressure and so much phoniness, and there's so much that's wrong with Hollywood, but that's true of any industry. So you just have to stay grounded. You have to remember what's really important to you. It's more important that I be at home for my daughter's first school play than it is I stay late at the office writing dialogue for a talking dolphin on Sequest.
Thank you
that's
for
probably
that,
one
Lee.
of the great
You were-
truisms
you
of
were-
life.
Really, really a breath of fresh air. I appreciate that. I also appreciate hearing from a fellow night owl. So many people want to tell us we have to get up early to write, and
I'm not alone. If I have a question at 1:30 in the morning, a legal question or a writing question, I can send a note to my sister who's a lawyer and she'll answer right back. Or the
Nice.
writing question to my brother Todd. Me and my siblings are all on the same bio clock. We all do our best work, late at night,
Well,
which
that's
is
convenient.
fine.
Yeah. All right. One last question. You kind of touched on this earlier, but what's next from you?
God, I've got so much. I have a book coming out in November called Calico, also another dual timeline thriller, a police procedural in present day, and a 1883 Western that share the same dead body. That's in November. And then I have the 5th Eve Ronan novel, Dreamtown, coming out in January. And then the second Sharp and Walker book, Ashes Never Lie, coming out in September of 2024. I've also got a whole bunch of book tour events coming up between now and January. If you go to my website, leegoldberg.com, you can find all the places I'm going to be signing books and telling lies.
That's what fiction writers do, right?
Professionally.
Yes. Hey, Lee, this has been a blast. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Hey, since WriterCon just happened, I'll give you at least a week off from trying to get you to come to WriterCon. But may I remind you that the WriterCon Facebook group is still going strong. And if you haven't joined, come join. It doesn't cost anything. And then you'll see what's going on in the writer world every day. And maybe connect with some other writers in a situation similar to yours. You can also subscribe to the completely free WriterCon e-newsletter. The information will be in the show notes, but basically just go to my website and send me an email and you're on. And for that matter, if you're enjoying this podcast, hey, subscribe and then rate it if you have good things to say and review it wherever you get podcasts. It helps get the word out and makes it easier for new listeners to discover us. All right? Until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.